Hello, my name is Dan Santat, and I am here. I'm a children's book author, illustrator, best known for books The Adventures of Beagle, which won the 2015 Randolph Caldecott Medal. Today, I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite books, After the Fall, How Humpty Dumpty Got Back Up Again, for Follett's Right to Connect program. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to go reading through a series of questions, and I will answer them to the best of my ability. So let's begin. A question from Michelle Mileski's class. Did you ever have a different job? The answer is yes. I had several jobs when I was a kid. I used to have a paper route. That was the first job I ever had. Back in the day, people used to have things called newspapers delivered to their homes, and I got on my bike and I had a sack of newspapers, and I would ride my bike around the neighborhood and deliver newspapers to all the houses in my neighborhood, and I'd have to wake up very early at 6 a.m. To do the job. It was a lot of fun, and all the money that I saved from that job I spent buying books like, mostly comic books. And that's really how I got my foot into being passionate about one day wanting to tell my own stories, because I was just a huge Spider-Man and X-Man and Incredible Hulk fan. And then once I graduated from art school, one of the first jobs I ever got out of art school was I worked at a video game company. I used to make video games. I was what was known as a game artist. And so I worked on games like Call of Duty and Spider-Man, and I particularly would be working on environments. So if Spider-Man's swinging around Manhattan, my job was to create Manhattan with a team of other artists. And I worked in that for about 7 years. Other jobs that I had a cartoon show on Disney Channel called The Replacements. If you go on Disney Plus, you can actually see season 1 of that show. And that went for 3 seasons. A different kind of storytelling. I'm much more comfortable staying at home in my Lululemon pants and writing and telling stories for children. Other than that, I'm a parent of 2. That's a full-time job, taking kids to piano lessons and helping them with their homework and such. But my heart goes out to making books for kids. Here's another question from Michelle Mileski's class. Where did you go to college? Which is a fantastic question, because I originally did not think I was going to be an artist. When I was a little kid, I loved to draw, but my parents didn't find any practical use for art as a career. And so my father, being a doctor, was hoping that I was also going to grow up and be a doctor, which wasn't really the thing that I was passionate about, but I really wanted to please my parents. So the first college I ever went to was the University of California in San Diego, UCSD. I went to college there for 4 years, got a degree in microbiology. I took the DATs. I got accepted into dental school. And then what ended up happening was all my friends in college would look at my college notes, and they would see how well I drew cells and animals and things like that. And they were the ones that convinced me that I should apply to art school. So then after that, I made a portfolio. I applied to art school. I got into the Art Center College of Design here in Pasadena, California, which I currently live in now. So I have 2 degrees. I have a degree in microbiology. My wife, actually, she works at Caltech. She is from the science field. And really, the only practical use I have for it is when my wife comes home from work and wants to complain about how things in the lab aren't working, I can actually understand what she's saying. But I primarily use my degree in illustration, and it's been very handy to me for most of my adult life. Here's another question from Michelle Mileski's class. A student asks, how did you start out illustrating books? Very interesting question. I guess there's different ways I can go about answering it. When I was a little kid, I used to make my own comic books. I would read Spider-Man, and then I would make my own Spider-Man stories. And, I'd read Calvin and Hobbes, and I would do like 1-page Calvin and Hobbes comics and things like that. Nothing that I really took too seriously. It was just kind of something I did for fun. And then I remember going to art school thinking I wanted to be in animation. I thought I wanted to work in animation because at the time, The Lion King was like the really big animated movie in the theaters. And there was all this talk and chatter about computer animation being the future of the business. And I thought, okay, well, this would be a great opportunity for me to get into animation, establish a viable career. And so I went to art school at the Art Center College of Design, and I took my first computer animation course. And if anybody has ever worked on computer software to animate or create art, it's very user unfriendly. It's very hard to use. There's so many things that you have to go through just to make something. And I remember making an animated film, which took about 2 minutes. It was a 2-minute movie. And I remember it took me about 15 weeks to make 2 minutes of film. And it wasn't even that good because I didn't really know how to do a lot of things. And I got really frustrated thinking there has to be a better way to tell stories. And so at my art school, there was a class about how to write and illustrate books for children. And at the time, the only people that were enrolled in that class were me and a good friend of mine who is also a children's book author named Peter Brown. And we were the only two in the class. And I remember all the other art students at the school would look at us and they'd say, oh, how cute. They want to make books for kids. But we took the class. We fell in love with it. I went off to illustrate for magazines and advertising agencies and things like that. But my heart was really into making books for children because what I loved about it was, you knew the format was 32 pages, there was a word count, and it was just a much easier way for me to be able to tell stories and get them out into the world. And so I joined an organization known as the SCBWI, which is short for the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. I went to my first conference and I had a portfolio and this rough layout of a book that I was working on. And this man, he saw this portfolio and he came up to me and he had my dummy book in his hand and he said, I love this book that you've written and I'd like to take it back to my publisher and give you a 2-book deal. And I was really excited. Turned out that man was Arthur Levine, best known for being the editor of Harry Potter. And that's how I got my foot in the business. I went to a children's book conference with a book that I had written, and one of the most famous editors in the world found me and gave me my first shot. And my first book came out in 2004. It was called The Guild of Geniuses. And then once that book came out, suddenly other editors and people in the publishing world saw my work, and then they contacted me to illustrate other manuscripts for their publishing houses. And that's really how I got started. It just started with one book and then a second, and then suddenly, you get more and more of your work out there, and then more and more people contact you. And here I am 17 years later. And now I think I've done over 100 books for kids. Here's a question from a student in Michelle Martello's second grade class. Where did you get your inspiration? Well, it's interesting. For me, a lot of my inspiration comes from things that I read or things that I watch on TV. I'm very big on kind of getting ideas from other ideas. So oftentimes you'll see me, watching a lot of movies or reading a lot of books. I'll probably watch 2 or 3 movies a week. Just over a holiday, over a recent holiday, I read 2-3 books while I go jog. I do a lot of jogging and I listen to audiobooks. And sometimes hearing ideas from other authors will get your mind jogging, and then you'll think of other ideas that are inspired by those ideas. So I think it's very important that, if you're someone who's interested in someday wanting to be a writer, you have to get into the business of wanting to read other people's work, because inspiration is a very big part of this business. And, it's always refreshing to see someone's point of view on something, because that can always springboard into giving you an idea of how you can tell something along those same lines. I believe that boredom is actually something that's very underrated. This day and age, we have a lot of people who are constantly on their digital devices, and or they're going out and they're just occupying every minute of their time doing something. It could be going from piano lessons to tennis lessons to doing homework to doing social media to being on the phone with friends to talking to parents and things like that. But really, I find that there's a great value in boredom. And what I mean by that is just having a moment of quiet where you can just sit, with your thoughts and you just relax. One example is when I was working at a video game company. I live in Los Angeles, so there's a lot of traffic going wherever you go. I had a 1-hour commute each way from home to this company that I was working at. And within that 1 hour, when you're sitting in traffic, you have to find things to do to not, die of boredom. And so there's this thing that happens where you just sit there and your mind starts wandering, and it starts just kind of entertaining itself and asking questions like, oh, well, what if this happened? Like, what if this happened? And then suddenly you're just finding like these ideas kind of coming together and merging into new ideas. And then other ideas will merge into other ideas, and then those will merge into other ideas. And then suddenly you kind of just start asking questions in your mind like, well, why did I think of that? Like, where would this lead? And a lot of the creativity comes by just giving your mind a moment to breathe and just think of something new out of all the nonsense that's maybe, speaking in your mind. So yeah, boredom is a very, very useful tool that I think not a lot of people recognize. When I was a kid growing up, I was an only child, and my parents would take me on these long vacation trips to places that I didn't want to go to, like way out into the desert. And we'd be driving, and my dad would say, "Hey, aren't all these rocks beautiful?" And being a 10-year-old kid, like that's not the thing you want to do when you're 10. And so you just stare out into the Arizona desert and say, "This is fantastic. I just want to disappear." And it's things like that. That's primarily where I learned how to use my boredom, just going on vacation trips with my parents. Here is a question from Brian in Michelle Martello's class. Why did you become an author? Well, Brian, it's a very interesting fact that I did not originally think I was going to be an author. Truth be told, I didn't think I was good enough to be an author. I didn't think I was good enough to be a writer. I was very seasoned as an illustrator. I spent a lot of my childhood and a lot of my adult life, drawing pictures, because I was just really good at it, and I was very confident with that. And then, you would read other people's work. I remember this, like you would read other people's work, and you'd see how eloquent they were with their writing. And you would think to yourself, gosh, I don't think I could ever write this well. And then when I finally found interest in telling stories, and this isn't to belittle the market of picture books, because picture books are very hard to do, because really there is, you're trying to tell a big story with as fewest words as possible. And that's not a very easy task. But for some reason, the thought of making a 32-page picture book to tell to kids seemed palatable to me. Like I felt like I could do it if I tried hard enough. And a lot of that experience came from reading a lot of other picture books and just kind of getting comfortable with the medium and trying to understand like how other people make picture books, and then trying to imitate that. Really, I think by nature, I'm a kid at heart. I never got tired of superheroes. I never got tired of robots. I never got tired of talking animals and cartoons. I still watch cartoons with my kids to this day. So, really by nature, my heart and my soul, like I really just love communicating with kids. And so starting in the children's book market, writing picture books for kids felt feasible. And it was comforting to me that I could tell stories that I wanted to tell. And that's really how I kind of got into becoming an author. It wasn't like a dream set out from the beginning. I didn't think, oh my gosh, I have all these amazing stories. I want to be an author. My initial inclination into this business was, I want to illustrate children's books and maybe someday I can be an author. And then things worked out for the better. I remember, having my first picture book come out, and the reviews were, so-so. They weren't too great. And that really kind of broke my heart because, you're putting your heart out there, you're telling a story, and people are like, well, it's not too great. Because when you're writing a story, you really are kind of revealing part of your soul. And so there's this courage that has to come with becoming, wanting to become an author, wanting to express your views and opinions and things like that. And so, being an author, it's because I feel like I have stories to tell, but it doesn't become any less frightening despite being an award winner. Each book that you do, each book that you make, it's like sending your child out, into the world saying, okay, go have a nice life. But, you definitely cherish it as like one of your children, and you want to make sure that, that everyone likes it, that, no one wants to squash its soul. So I guess the best way to answer your question was, I didn't set out to be an author, but I was kind of put in a position where I felt comfortable enough to try writing, and things have paid off. And with that said, the more you write, the better you get. And the more you read, the more inspired you get, and the better your stories are. It's like riding a bicycle. The more you do it, the better you get. It's like flexing a certain brain muscle in your head. All right, here is a question from Edgar in Kristen Zach's first grade class. What do you do for fun? I have a lot of hobbies. I think it's really important to have a lot of different things outside of what you do. A lot of them can be artistically inclined. Like, I'm an artist, but I don't want to sit at my desk painting pictures all day. I like to, spread my wings and try other things. I think it's very important to be well-rounded and have a knowledge of all kinds of things. So I'm going to go through this very long list of things that I like to do. So first, I love playing video games. When I was a kid, the very first Atari 2600 came out when I was 5 years old. And so, I'm that old dinosaur that loved video games when they first came out. And, the graphics were just like little boxes and things like that. And I mean, you kids, if you saw these graphics, like you would hurl, you would be disgusted by them. But, I grew up an entire lifetime, playing video games. And as video games got more complicated, they started telling more complex stories, and I love them. Another hobby of mine, I love watching movies. I'm always watching all kinds of movies and TV shows. I always just love a really good story. Now it's funny because my wife, she only likes to watch comedies because she wants to be in a good mood. I'm the kind of person that will watch anything because I just want to feel. I just want to feel an emotion. I could go into a movie saying this movie's going to make me cry, but it's going to feel so good to cry. Or I could go into a movie and say, oh, this movie's going to make me laugh. Or I can say, oh, this action movie is going to really psych me up and get me really, excited and pumped up. I like watching how other people weave stories. And those kind of things inspire me to tell, other stories as well. I also like to read books. One of my favorite writers is David Sedaris. One of my favorite books is Me Talk Pretty One Day. I'm a big fan of satire. I'm a runner. I exercise a lot. I ran the LA Marathon for the first time last year. That took a lot of time to train, and then to run 26 miles. That takes about 5 hours. So as much as I say I like to run, I also don't like to be in a state of mind where I'm reminded that I am running. So a lot of the times I'll have headphones on while I'm running, and I'll listen to podcasts. I like listening to podcasts, or I'll listen to audiobooks, or I'll listen to music. I also like to cook, and that was something that my mom taught me. So I'm Thai American, and my mom has all these fantastic Thai recipes. So I learned how to cook some Thai food. But my wife has very finicky taste, so I do a lot of pasta. But I'm always I'm always interested in trying new recipes. I always wanted to make a really nice fried chicken. So I'll scour all these recipes to find the right fried chicken recipe. I taught myself how to make pickles. Taught myself how to bake bread. One of my greatest passions is coffee. So much so that I actually roast my own coffee in my basement. You start out with a green bean, and then you put it in a coffee roaster. 6-7 minutes later, you've got this beautiful roast. You learn how to grind it. You steep it in the right temperature of water, things like that. I also like to build furniture. I have a wood shop in the basement. And so a lot of the times, this is something that a lot of people don't see because I don't post on social media, but I like to build tables and chairs. Because when I went to art school, I went to a great art design school, and there used to be an industrial design department, and you would see these people building these beautiful chairs and beautiful tables and bookshelves and things like that. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my gosh, like I would just love to have a piece of furniture that I could use that I knew that I built. And so, I set up a wood shop in my basement. And so we don't have a whole lot of great woods here in California. So most of the work I do is with plywood. But that is definitely something that I like to do, among other things. I have a whole bunch of hobbies. I'm always continuing to try to create more hobbies. Like I'm trying to teach myself how to play ukulele, but having 10, 12 hobbies, it's really hard to, get really good at playing a ukulele. I built a ukulele out of cardboard, one year. And that was something that I learned. I really I understood how to use the instrument just from building. And really, I guess my real hobby is just, I just like to have knowledge of all kinds of things. Like I'm inspired to do a lot of things. One last thing, I love to travel. I just recently went to London. I was a huge fan of, English soccer. I'm a huge Manchester United fan. I have all kinds of interests. Here is another question from Kristen Zach's first grade class. This question comes from CJ. Did you go to school to learn how to draw? So there's a long story to that. When I was a kid, when I started out, I would have a pencil, paper, crayons, whatever was around to make pictures. And my education primarily started with me copying pictures of things that I liked. So I was a huge Garfield fan. I was a huge Peanuts fan, a huge Calvin and Hobbes fan. And then I would look at those pictures from the comic strips, and I would just try to copy it as best as I could. And a lot of that practice that I did for months and months and years, just years growing up, not realizing that it was something that I did for fun, but also just a valuable lesson in, like fine motor skills and muscle control and being able to see things and understanding how things are laid out and designed. Most of my early education just came from me practicing and being self-taught. My parents, they didn't let me take art classes when I was a kid. So I had this wonderful librarian in grade school, and she pulled me aside and she said, well, Mr. Santat, I know that your parents won't let you take art classes, but that doesn't mean that you can't check out books to teach yourself how to draw. And one of the best books that I ever got that she checked out for me was this book called How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, which it was this fantastic book about how to draw superheroes, how to lay out comic panels, how to write a script, basics in perspective. And now there's probably a lot of you that are thinking like, well, I don't even know how to draw a stick figure. I can't do that kind of thing. Well, you're just in luck. You get the book and it starts out with stick figures. And then, you're taking these stick figures and they're showing how to draw gestural lines and understanding form and proportion. And then eventually it goes on to the next steps about like how to visualize a skeleton on this stick figure, and then how to break them out into basic shapes, like your head is a ball, your arm is a cylinder, your torso is, it's a big, just a big wedge. And then you slowly start adding muscles and costumes and facial expressions. And then, before you know it, you can draw a picture of Iron Man drinking Jamba Juice or something like that. I checked out that book. I checked out that book from the school every week, to the point where, by the time I finished grade school, the librarian let me keep the book. And to this day, I still have it on my bookshelf. And now my kids, look through it every now and then because, sometimes they want to learn how to draw. And the book's still in publication. So if any of you are interested, you can go out and you can buy the book, or maybe it's in your school library. But yeah, really, my education up to the age of 21, I didn't have any formal art training until I applied to art college. And then when I went to art college, I got into this really great school, the Art Center College of Design. And that was like the first time I ever got any formal drawing lessons or painting lessons. It was the first time I actually painted in acrylics or oils. They also taught us like the basics of woodworking, working with clay. It was a very well-rounded 2.5-year program, which was just amazing. And I was surrounded by a whole bunch of very talented students. And we're still friends. And to this day, you'll go out and you look into the world and you'll see like all the amazing things that your friends are doing these days. And you kind of reflect and you think back, like when you were kids in art school, like, oh my gosh, it's a miracle to see that we're all kind of here in this place, now creating things for the world, when, 20 years ago, we were dreaming like, oh, someday people will hopefully like to see the stuff that I make. Here's a question from Kristen Zach's first grade class from Joey. What is your favorite food? That is a simple answer. If coffee is a food, I love drinking coffee. If I had to pick a certain meal, if I go to any restaurant, if fried chicken's on the menu, I will order fried chicken in a heartbeat. Love a good fried chicken. I have a great story, actually. So the best fried chicken I've ever had in the entire United States is in Louisiana. It is this place called Willie Mae's Scotch House, which is way out in the middle of nowhere. And so I only knew about Willie Mae's Scotch House because I was watching it on the Food Network, and it sounded like this amazing place. And so one year I was on tour with Dave Pilkey, who's known for Captain Underpants, and he and I worked together on Ricky Ricotta's Mighty Robot series. And so Dave and I were going around the country and we were touring, and we ended up in Louisiana for a conference. And I remember saying to Dave and his wife, I said, Dave, I'm going to go out to this fried chicken place. I don't know if you'd care to join me. And Dave said, oh yeah, that sounds amazing. I'd love to join you. And so we got into a taxi cab. We went out into the middle of nowhere. It was like this middle of nowhere. It's this little house. It's a house, guys. It's a house that they converted into a restaurant. And it only has like 8 tables. And we go inside and we sit down. And I remember we take our first bites of the fried chicken, and Dave and his wife and I, we looked at each other. We said, this is the most amazing fried chicken we've ever had. And so we had to rush back. We had to rush back to this conference because we had a panel. And I remember the next day, we had to go do some school visits. But while we're doing the school visits, in between like our sessions, Dave looks over to me and says, "Hey, do you want to go back to that fried chicken place for lunch?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." I was thinking the same thing. You just beat me to it. So we go back out to the place, and we eat the fried chicken again. And then when the food server comes by and asks, "Oh, what would you like dessert?" Dave and I, we looked at each other and we said, "We'd like more fried chicken." So if you're ever in Louisiana and you ever come across a place called Willie Mae's Scotch House, that is the best fried chicken I've ever had in my life. Here's another question from Kristen Zach's first grade class. This one, I believe, is also from Joey. What is a fear of yours? Now, this is a very generalized fear, but this is a fear that I've had for most of my life. And maybe it's an odd fear. I don't know. I've asked other friends about this, but they don't seem to share that same fear. I had this fear that I was not going to be able to get a job. More specifically, I guess my concern was that I did not have enough skills to be an adult, if that makes any sense. So when I was growing up, I was really nervous about like going to someone and asking for a job. And so, I would do chores, I would do errands, but the only job I ever had was I worked in a comic book shop when I was 16 years old. And I just worked the cash register. I filed comic books. But a month into the job, I come into work one day, and the comic book shop is burned down. And that was like the first job I ever had. And I didn't feel like I was very good at it because no one ever came in to buy comic books. Turned out the owner of the store burned his own comic book shop down, but that's a whole other story. But there was just like there's this fear that I had. Well, I guess on a deeper level, my biggest fear is that like I would be homeless, that I would not be able to provide any skills. And so I remember going to school, and I would study and work so hard because I thought, you know what, I need to get to a place where I'm skilled enough that I can be good enough to get a job anywhere. And then when I got my very first job out of art school, I was at a video game company. I remember being so relieved. I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm useful to society. Someone wants me for this measly salary, at a job that I kind of like, but I don't really like because the hours are really bad. But there was just this immense satisfaction that I had, that I knew that someone wanted me to work for them, and it's a weird fear to have, I guess. I guess that really it's a lot of insecurity about your own personal abilities, which kind of rings true to, even when I won the Caldecott Medal, because when I received that award, I remember feeling a lot of inadequacy, thinking like, I think they made a mistake. Actually, this is something that you talk to about a lot with other Caldecott Medal winners. When you talk about winning the Caldecott Medal, none of us ever feel like we're worthy of the award, and there's a lot of insecurity that comes with it. So yeah, and I think that's the nature of most artists or people who write or create art. There is this insecurity that comes with, not feeling adequate or good enough. So if you feel like that right now as a child, it's perfectly normal, because those feelings do happen when you're an adult. You just learn to live with it through experience, and then you realize that these little tics that you have that make you feel unconfident turn into things that you realize that these are feelings that everybody has. So now that I am a young 45 years old, I clearly not too concerned about whether I'm able to provide for my family or this world, but that really was my drive and my motivation to do what I do for a living, because I was worried that I wasn't going to be good enough for this world. That is a long question for what would be a simple question answer. Other than that, you can say spiders. Spiders, like the big spiders, little spiders. Get out of here. Spiders are disgusting. Here's a question from Ms. Tasha Boeem's 8th grade class. From Daniel, the question is there any advice for writing a book? My advice for writing a book is to really fall in love with books. What I mean by that is, as much as you like to write books, you have to really love reading books. And I think reading books is the best way to become a writer, because, you'll read how people write and subconsciously, or, you'll look at that, you'll look at the way they write. And if you read enough books, you'll understand how story works. And as a result, you'll hear all these people talking about 3-act structures and things like that. I'm not familiar with all the rules and devices for good storytelling, but because I've read so many books, because I've exposed myself to so many stories, I may not know the terminology about writing a book, but I understand what makes a good book. And I think one of the most important things about writing is having a good taste. And what I mean by that is, you may watch something that you love, but you need to ask yourself why you love that thing. And then you have to go so far as to ask what other people think and whether or not their opinions of that movie or book or story match with yours. And then you uncover more questions. You ask, well, why is it that I like it, but they don't like it? Or if you watch a bad movie and you try to figure out, well, why is this movie bad? You learn a lot from good things. You learn from bad things. You learn from like difference of opinions from other creative people. But I think beyond being able to tell a story, you need to be able to stand outside of yourself and look at the work that you make, or look at other people's work and try to understand what makes it good, what makes it bad, what they're trying to say. But really understand what the story or the writer's trying to communicate, and whether it's the best way to tell that story. One of the best lessons I ever got was illustrating a book that was written by Mac Barnett that I illustrated, called Oh No, or How My Science Project Destroyed the World. And when I got the manuscript from Mac, it was only about 127 words. The entire manuscript was only 127 words. But there was something beautiful about the brevity of the manuscript that allowed me as an illustrator to stretch my legs and do most of the storytelling through the visual parts of the book. And for me, that was a valuable lesson in the economy of words. There's a balance between drawing pictures and writing words that you have to kind of find. And when I looked at my own work, I realized that I was too wordy, that I was too descriptive on certain things, and I wouldn't let the artwork carry some of the weight. And that's an example of being inspired and learning from, like other writing friends and how to do it better. So yeah, just by the nature of studying other people's work, it helps you become better at your own craft. So here is a question from Miss Ashley Fragoso's class, 4th grade class. How long did this book take to write? We are referring to my book, After the Fall. After the Fall was an idea that I had way back in art school, but nothing that I really pursued until I got to know my wife. My wife and I, we've been married for 18 years. And, she was the inspiration for this book because she suffers from anxiety and depression. And I remember the idea of writing a story about Humpty Dumpty, because I never liked the idea that the nursery rhyme basically says there was an egg that sat on a wall, he fell, they couldn't put him together, the end. it just didn't feel like there was any closure. It didn't even really feel like there was much of a story. If anything, it felt like the beginning to a story. So, upon thinking about the story and trying to uncover what I wanted to say about it, I think that probably took me like 4 or 5 months of just thinking of a good idea to tell about that story. And then when actually writing the story, I think that probably took another 7 or 8 months of just figuring out how the story was going to unfold. Definitely the ending, the last 6 or 7 spreads of the book, where he's facing the wall and he's trying to, overcome his fear of climbing the wall. That was probably the most important part of the story. And that took, oh my gosh, between my editor and I, that probably took a good 3 or 4 months just to get the ending just right. And then you're doing the final artwork. The entire process for the book took me about, probably like a year and a half. I mean, if we're just talking about the actual writing and illustrating, that's 6 months, but a good year of just kind of sitting there and thinking about how the story is going to play out. I think I think there's this misconception of what writing is. I think a lot of people think that when you're sitting in front of, your typewriter or your pad and paper or your computer and you're actually typing words on a page, that's writing. The way I see it, writing is really just, and 80% of it is just sitting and working out the story in your mind, in your brain, and you'll just sit there. Sometimes, I remember when my kids were little and they'd be at the playground and my kids would be playing on the playground, and I would just sit there on the bench and my mind would just be thinking of the story and just working on the story in my mind. And then my wife would nudge me and say, "Where are the kids?" And what? Oh, there. And then my mind would just disappear and working on this story. So a lot of writing actually doesn't appear like writing. I may be washing dishes and yet I might be working on a story in my head. I might be working on another book. I might be illustrating another book, but in my mind, I might be working on other stories. So, writing is, it's really hard to kind of nail down a definitive amount of time to make a book, because sometimes it can take years if you kind of just lay all the events out over time. But the actual tangible part of it, the actual writing of the story, usually it's 95% done in my head, and then the last 5% of it is writing on a piece of paper or on a writing program. Here's a question from Cindy Lovelace's 5th grade class. This question comes from Arsene. What is your favorite book? I have a lot of favorite books. When I was a kid, I was a huge fan of the Encyclopedia Brown series by Donald J. Sobol. I don't know if those are still in bookshelves, but Encyclopedia Brown was this kid detective who could solve all these crimes in this little town. And each book, there were a bunch of volumes, but each book probably were broken up into about 7 or 8 different stories. And each one, his father, who was a police officer, would say, "Well, this is a tough case to crack, but these are all the clues that I have." And Encyclopedia Brown would look at the evidence and he would think about it and say, I think I have the solution. And I'd read every story and I'd say, oh, maybe I can figure this one out. Never did. I was never as smart as Encyclopedia Brown. I gobbled up all those Encyclopedia Brown books when I was a kid. And I always thought if I became a private detective and I opened up my own private detective agency, I would, my secret alias would be, Donald J. Sobol. And then as I got older, I loved reading other books. One of my favorite writers is David Sedaris. My favorite book of his is this wonderful book called Me Talk Pretty One Day. Let's see, other books. Probably one of my most favorite graphic novels that affected me as a person, Gene Yang's American Born Chinese, which was a fascinating read. Being an Asian American myself, reading a book about the perspective of an Asian American protagonist in the story. It was fantastic. And it was one of these stories that really spoke to my soul and changed me as a person. So so Gene and I are very good friends, and he was the one that inspired me to write my own memoir. You know, we were talking one day, and I was telling him about how much I loved American-born Chinese. And he said, well, you know, we were sharing stories about the struggles of being Asian Americans, wanting to be writers, and how our parents wanted us to be doctors or engineers or lawyers or things like that. And it was Gene who inspired me. He said, well, you should write your own memoir. And so that's friendships spring up from, like, you know, your favorite books, things like that. Here's another question from Cindy Lovelace's 5th grade class. What did you want to be when you were growing up? This is a question from Ashley. So when I was a little kid, I remember I wanted to make movies. I think I wanted to be now this is probably, there's a little dose of reality here, because I remember growing up watching movies, loving movies, thinking I would like to be an actor, or I would like to, more importantly, maybe be a director. Like, I'd like to make the movies. Like, I didn't want to just like be a part of the movie, but I wanted to design the entire world. I wanted to design the entire look of the movie. Now, one of the disheartening things about it was, growing up as an Asian American kid in the 80s was you didn't see many Asian people in films, unless, you know, it was like a Steven Seagal or Jackie Chan movie where, you know, you were the one getting beaten up. Like, that really was the limited role of Asian Americans in American cinema back in the day. And as a result, like, I immediately wrote that off. I immediately said, well, that's not a path for me to be a storyteller. Like, at a very young age, I thought, oh, it'd be great to do this. And then you look at the possibilities and you realize, well, they're not there for me. I'm not going to be someone that will be able to, like, break barriers and you know, say, well, I'm an exemption to this entire rule. And that's when I thought, maybe I want to be an animator. You know, like, it's still a great way to tell stories. And, like, I can still be behind the camera. But it wasn't until I made my first animated film that I realized I actually hate it. I hate telling stories in an animated form. And I think in one of the earlier questions, I had mentioned that I was accepted into dental school and I was going to be a dentist. There was in no way at any point in my life that I actually wanted to be a dentist. In fact, there was no interest in my life to wanting to be in any kind of field of science. Like, I just didn't, I wasn't a very good student in biology or science, but, you know, it was something that I did because I thought it was what my parents wanted me to do. Whereas my true passion was art. So it's, yeah, I mean, really, I don't think there was any part in my mind that I thought that I would do anything non-artistic. I mean, even when you end up working in a field that you want to work at, there's still, you know, pluses and minuses to the whole thing. I remember when I worked in the video game industry, I thought, oh, this is amazing. But really, like, the hours are long. You're contributing to a small part of a bigger idea. So it didn't feel like the entire thing was entirely your idea to come up with. When I create work, I like to create something that's a little bit more personal, something that I've written and illustrated. And, you know, like, children's publishing was something that definitely suited me perfectly. I mean, I do other things in art. I've shown in galleries. I work in video games. I've worked in animation, things like that. But, you know, in that little wheelhouse of a craft, my real passion is telling stories to children. And even to add on top of that was, I love drawing, but as the years have gone on, I realized that my true passion actually is storytelling. And I just so happen to use art as a way to tell those stories. Now I can't even separate the two. If I'm drawing something, it's generally because I want to tell a story with it. So, you find out a lot of things about yourself just by experiencing life in various ways. Here's another question from Cindy Lovelace's class, 5th grade. This is a question from Asa. What is it like to win a Caldecott medal? That is a fantastic question, and I don't think the answer is what you will think it is. So when I'll tell you what happened. So it was 4:30 in the morning. I got a phone call, and it was the Caldecott committee. They were in Chicago, and I live on the West Coast. I'm in California, and they called to tell me that I won the Caldecott medal. And I remember feeling nothing. I remember feeling just this feeling of like, oh, wow, that's cool. Never thinking that something like that would ever happen to you. And then and I remember immediately after hanging up the phone, I started to cry because it was this feeling of achieving something that was so beyond your dreams. And usually when I have dreams and aspirations, I always kind of think of like dreams and aspirations that are tangible, meaning like, oh, someday I'd love to own a house because I think, yeah, I could afford a house someday. But, never on the scale of saying, I hope I win the Caldecott medal. It's just too grand of an award for you to think like, oh gosh, someday, like you don't even dare think about it because you never think it's a possibility. And so when it happened, I remember just crying because, this thing happened to me in life that was beyond my scope of imagination. And then as a result, I remember thinking about all the people that went on to win Caldecott medals and the legacy that they left. I was thinking of, your Maurice Sendak's and so forth, and your Brian Selznick's and your David Wiesner's and things like that. And suddenly you're kind of just thrust upon this company of people that you really admired throughout your entire life. And then there's this feeling of inadequacy, this feeling of like, gosh, I'm not really sure if they got the right person, or now you have to live up to a certain standard. Now that you're an award winner, you have like every book that you make has to be as good as that book. And I think I put a lot of pressure on myself to perform. So much so that, there was a good period of time, I would say maybe a good 2 or 3 months, where I was actually a little depressed after winning the Caldecott medal. And I remember my agent calling me, and she said to me, you need to stop working for a good 2 months. Like, don't go to your desk, don't draw anything, don't write any stories, don't think about it. Just go off and just be with your family, play video games, do whatever, but just don't do work because you're stressing yourself out so much that you're not enjoying what you just accomplished. And I was a workaholic. Like I was always constantly working. I'm always having like 4 or 5 projects on my lap. And then just to stop and not do anything and just sit there. And I remember being really restless, thinking like, who relaxes? This is terrible. I hate this. Like I hate relaxing. This is dumb. And so it wasn't until maybe like week 5 or 6 of just relaxing and doing nothing when I finally kind of got into the groove of understanding what I did and appreciating what I did, and just being very appreciative of the opportunity to be honored in that way. And one of the best pieces of advice that I got was from a fellow author, a friend of mine, Bruce Colville, because I asked him, I said, so like, I was very open with him. I told him like, I'm having a hard time, with this award, with this this recognition. And, he said to me, he said, look, William Shakespeare wrote some great things, but he also wrote some really horrible things too in between, and for every brilliant book that, he wrote, he also wrote some trash, but then as he kept going, he would write some brilliant stuff again. And you really can't let the fear of failure keep you down. You just have to keep going. Sometimes you're going to have your hits, sometimes you're going to have your misses, but you just keep going. And that was some of the best advice that I ever got, was from Mr. Bruce Colville. And so, yes, to this day, winning this Caldecott medal, it's pretty great. I mean, now that I have a new focus goal, like, I don't want to just be recognized for Beagle. Like, I don't want to be known as like, oh, there's that guy that did that one book. Like, I'd like to be known for a body of work. And then really, as a writer, that's just what I've sought out to do, is just create a body of work that people can like, look, and admire. But yeah, no, it's a great achievement that I never expected in my life. It's given me a couple more years to be a cool dad, to my kids. And as a result, it's given me opportunities to work with some really great people that I didn't think I'd ever get to work with. So yeah, it's a wonderful privilege and an honor. And it's something that I feel on a daily, that it's something that I have to live up to. Okay, here's a question from Tracy Ferguson's second grade class. This question is from Emmy. What is your favorite part of the book, referring to After the Fall? So I should just go into detail that the book is a metaphor about my wife overcoming anxiety and depression. When we had our first child, she was having a lot of anxiety and depression afterwards. And, it wasn't until maybe 2 or 3 years later that we realized that she was going through postpartum depression. And, she went to a doctor. She got mental treatment for it. And she, eventually got into a much better place. But a lot of it was her overcoming this anxiety that she's had most of her life. And I found it to be very inspirational. And so you take a story like After the Fall, and you relate to that in a way where you think that, there are ways that kids can relate to Humpty's, plight in a way, such as like maybe you're someone who failed at a first attempt at something, or maybe you fell off a bike. But there are things that create anxieties in certain people, and then as a result, you live your life in a way to avoid those triggers. So in After the Fall, there are things that you notice throughout the story that have to do with falling. So when he's in the grocery store, he doesn't climb the ladder to get his favorite cereals because he might fall. He doesn't climb up to his bunk bed because there's a ladder and he might fall. One of my favorite parts of the book is actually the last few parts of the book, where he faces his fears of climbing the wall. And what I really liked about it was the just a little tiny things. Breaking it down, showing fear without actually saying he's afraid. One of my favorite spreads is the shaking hand trying to grab the next rung of the ladder. There's also like little subtle elements that reflect his mental state. So if you look at the wall, he falls in the summer. So there's a lot of green leaves on the wall, but then as you can see, it reflects in his mood. As he's getting sadder and sadder, when fall comes in, the leaves are falling off of the wall. When winter comes, like the entire wall is dead, the entire vine is dead. There's no color. It's just like very, desaturated and everything like that. But when he has his rebirth, when he finally decides to face the wall, it's spring again. So, the colors are very warm. The leaves have grown back up on the vines of the wall and so forth. There's also little Easter eggs in the book that a lot of people aren't aware of. A few are, for example, there's a spread where Humpty Dumpty's climbing the ladder, and there's a sign in the background that's the number 12. And that is because when I made the book, my wife and I were married for 12 years. The book is dedicated to my wife, Leah, so the book is a love letter to her. And then other things, in the last spread, when you see the bird flying off, in between the wings, you'll see a building with the word Tager on it. And Tager is actually my wife's maiden last name. Her name was Leah Tager. Now she is Leah Tager, Leah Santat now. And then another little detail that I like that a lot of people miss. A lot of people miss this. There's a spread where he's walking by the wall, but what you subtly hint at is that he's walking along the shadow. He's walking along the shadow of the wall, so that the shadow of himself is projected on top of the wall. Like, that's the best he can get into getting back on top of the wall, is he uses his shadow to cast it on top of the wall. And that was actually one of the original cover ideas that I had. But the ending, you know, having him hatch from an egg, that hands down is probably, you know, my on a personal level, I think it's the best writing that I've done. And, you know, it wouldn't have been possible without the help of my editor. And I remember we were on the phone. A lot of times when my editor and I work, we like to talk out these ideas. And in this particular case, my editor just out of the blue says, "What do you think's inside Humpty Dumpty?" And I said, "Oh, like, would it be weird if there was a bird inside him?" And she said, "Yeah, what if he hatched?" And I said, "That would be terrifying, right? Like, wouldn't that be terrifying if Humpty Dumpty is just going about his business and, you know, suddenly a bird just bursts out of his chest?" And she says, "No, what if he changes? What if he changes to something bigger? Like, he moves on to his next step in life because he overcame this obstacle that's been holding him down." And that really inspired me to say, okay, well, let's try to figure out a way where he hatches and becomes something new and better and moves on to other things. And so just the buildup of Humpty, you know, spreading his wings, becoming a bird, flying off, that, you know, undoubtedly is my favorite part of the book. So much so, you know, my wife has been very touched by the fact that the book is dedicated to her and it's about her overcoming anxiety. She got a tattoo of a bird feather on her back, and, you know, I have a bird feather tattoo here on my arm. So as a result, you know, now we have to be married together for the rest of our lives. That's just how it works.